go. Thank you, Dr. Lin. So many of you have followed the exciting advances in immune-based therapy. You probably read about it in the news. These major breakthroughs that have occurred in some cancers where you can actually cure them. There is movement in the prostate cancer field as well. And Dr. John Lee, who just joined us about a year ago here at Fred Hutch and the University of Washington as an assistant professor, as a medical oncologist, whose laboratory really focuses on immune-based therapies for prostate cancer. He'll give you an update of the current state of the field. John?
Thanks very much for the introduction. So I have the opportunity of really sort of conveying my excitement about immunotherapy as it relates to prostate cancer. So first I want to give a brief overview about the human immune system, and really the immune system is very important because it protects us from injuries and diseases that affect us pretty much on a daily basis, and certainly it plays a significant role in preventing cancer during our lifetime. So the immune system can be divided into two major areas. One is the innate immune system, and this really includes physical barriers like your skin and mucous membranes. There are additional types of cells in the body that work to remove foreign substances and then also to recruit other immune cells to specific sites. Importantly, these innate cells do not have a memory component, meaning that if you were to have the same infection a week later or a month later, those cells would not have the ability to recognize that you had been affected previously and mount a more potent response. The second portion of the immune system is really the adaptive immune system, and this is sort of the specific, slow, and very powerful aspect of the immune system. This is made up of B cells and T cells. B cells make antibodies. T cells make helper cells and cytotoxic killers. And really, the whole idea behind vaccination is to really engage the adaptive immune system so that you take advantage of this memory component so that you can fight off things that you encounter in the future. And that's something that I'll talk about a little bit more in detail as it relates to immunotherapy and prostate cancer later in the talk. So a really important thing that the immune system has to do is to discriminate self, which is something that's innate to your own body or intrinsic to your own body, from something that's foreign, which is non-self. And so there are two cartoons here. You identify something that's self and you're happy with it, but you identify something that's non-self and then your immune cells are unhappy and they want to get rid of this thing so that it maintains your health overall. So if you think about cancer, cancer is really driven from normal cells within your body, and it's a disease of abnormalities in genes. And then we also know that there are a variety of viruses that can also induce cancer. And so the immune system really has to be able to identify these genetic abnormalities as well as the foreign substances from these viruses that are important to inducing cancer. So we know from work over the period of several decades that overcoming the immune system is really important in the development of cancer, and it's actually one of the hallmarks of cancer, right? So the body is actually quite amazing in that it can recognize early cancer cells and try to control them and remove them from the body. And so the initiation and development of cancer has to overcome that ability of the immune system. So how do we then sort of tilt the balance back so that we can actually empower the immune system to actually identify these cancer cells and remove them as they should? So some of the things that we're looking at are priming the immune system, such as using cancer vaccines, reducing suppressive signals in the body. So I'll talk a little bit about the fact that there needs to be a set of checks and balances or a homeostasis, right? If you have immune cells going wild, it can cause a lot of problems. If they're inactive, then obviously you can have diseases and cancer overtake the body. And then lastly, we can re-engineer things in ways that we haven't been able to before to really hone in on the specificity of immune cells and then have them attack cancer in a very powerful way. So I really want to stress this sort of middle way of the immune system. There has to be sort of checks and balances. And so we think about this balance between signals that activate the immune system and signals that suppress the immune system. And so if you think about a variety of conditions such as allergies or autoimmune diseases, in that setting, the activating signals in the immune system are sort of revved up, right? But in terms of infections and cancers, it's flipped the opposite way in that perhaps immune suppressing signals are sort of the active signal. And so we need to figure out ways to rebalance this in our body. So I want to talk a little bit about the strategies that have been successful thus far in prostate cancer. And really, one of the biggest successes in the field was the development of this cancer vaccine called Provenge. And essentially what this is approved for is for men with asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer. And so what is Provenge? Well, what we can do is actually take specific cells out of patients' bodies, and we can engineer these cells to express high levels of a protein that's present on the surface of cancer cells. And this is then presented to your immune system, and your immune system will then mount a response to this protein that's present on prostate cancer. And so then the T cells, which are part of the adaptive immune system, will then get revved up, and once they identify the prostate cancer cells in the body, we'll identify them as being abnormal, non-self, and then start to kill them. And so this was FDA approved in April of 2010 as it provided a 4-month survival benefit for, again, men who have metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer. So that was really one of the early successes in the field. More recently, as many of you may have heard, there have been a number of immune checkpoint agents, so including this drug called Pembrolizumab. And the idea is that, again, T cells have this sort of this set of checks and balances. And so when T cells are activated, ultimately they have to be shut off. And so within tumors, tumors actually have this great ability to shut off those T cells, and that's one way that they overcome the immune system. So if we could somehow remove that break from the T cells and make them active again, perhaps then they can actually go ahead and try and eliminate these tumors. And this is actually the idea behind this drug, Pembrolizumab. And the cool thing about Pembrolizumab is that it's actually approved across tumors, but you have to have a specific genetic abnormality within the tumor. And so this is an interesting link between the genetics of cancers and therapies. So we know that there are a subset of cancers that have defects in genes that repair the DNA. And so for patients that have this specific type of mismatch repair deficiency, this drug is actually approved across the board, across multiple cancers. So as I said, it was approved in May 2017 for any solid tumor with this specific genetic abnormality. And it was based on 5 different studies of 150 total patients. And they saw response rates on the order of about 40%. And the really interesting thing is that there are a subset of patients that actually have a long duration of response. And so when we look specifically at metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer, we know that this abnormality is present in about 3 to 12%. And so there's an importance in pursuing genetic analyses of these tumors because it opens up opportunities to undergo treatment with these specific immunotherapies. Another thing is that work from Dr. Schweitzer within the group has suggested that there are specific subtypes of prostate cancer that are enriched further in these genetic abnormalities, and that's work that is done here at UW and Fred Hutch. So what I'm very excited about, and that what we're working on in the lab, is this idea of adoptively transferring T cells that have been genetically modified in a way that they're empowered to attack cancer. And so a lot of work over the last several decades has focused on being able to actually remove these immune cell populations from the body, to actually activate them and grow them in dishes in the lab. And then what we can do is actually introduce new genes into these cells to create some specificity so that they will actually recognize prostate cancer or other cancers specifically. And then these cells have this innate ability to engage other immune cells or to directly kill cancer cells. And that's really the property that we want to take advantage of and add that level of specificity. And so once we've expanded this army of redirected cells, we can then introduce that back into the patient. The idea is to really grow this army that we can then unleash on the cancer to try and eliminate it. And so one of the sort of genetic tricks that we can do is to develop these chimeric antigen receptors. And what chimeric antigen receptors are, it's really broken up into two parts. When there's one part that can identify a specific marker, again, a marker that's on cancer cells. And then there's a part that's on the inside of the cell that, when this receptor is engaged, will tell the cell, okay, let's get active and let's go after this cancer. And so the cool thing about these CARs is that you can really design it against any target. And it really takes advantage of the power of these killer T cells. But the thing that we have to be mindful of is that if we target something, we have to make sure that it's really specific to cancer, because these cells are so potent that if for whatever reason even a small amount is present in normal tissues, you may get toxicity in those normal tissues as well. So in the popular media, you may have heard about these CAR T cells and how it's really transforming the treatment of patients who have hematologic or blood cancers. So for instance, in really relapse and refractory B-cell leukemias, they're seeing complete response rates up to 90%, whereas with traditional chemotherapy, the expected response rate would only be about 30%. So you're seeing a threefold increase, and some of these patients are actually being cured, which is kind of unheard of, right? And so CAR T cells are approved for acute lymphocytic leukemias and large B-cell lymphomas. Solid tumors, unlike these blood cancers, have some additional challenges, but there are some early reports from clinical trials indicating that there are responses that are occurring in solid tumors, and this is something that we really want to build upon. So what's going on with CAR T-cell immunotherapy in prostate cancer? Well, as I mentioned, the targets need to be really prostate-specific. And so in the field, we've known about two proteins or markers that are fairly prostate-specific. One is prostate stem cell antigen, and the other is prostate-specific membrane antigen. And there are, in fact, CAR T-cells that have been designed to target these specific markers. One is actually opening up at City of Hope, likely later this year, and then another is actually actively recruiting at the University of Pennsylvania. And so we want to get in on this and certainly try to advance the technology beyond what is currently available. And so my lab is focused on developing new CARs specifically for prostate cancer. And so we actually, in the last year, have been fortunate to identify or engineer and identify a CAR that seems to have fairly specific activity. And so I'll show you a movie here where essentially on the left panel, we've mixed these T cells that have been modified with some normal cells. The normal cells are in green. And on the right side are the T cells that have been modified and mixed with prostate cancer cells that are also labeled in green. And so what we see here when I play this movie is that on the left panel, you see the growth of the normal cells. They're not affected by the CAR-modified T cells. Whereas on the right side, you see that those green cells are really controlled. Most of them are actually dead, but still retain this green marker, and they're not growing as we see on the left. So we've actually started to look at this in mouse models. So we established tumors in mice, and then we injected these mice with these T cells to see whether this new CAR could potentially control prostate cancer. And so it's very early, but what we're seeing is that with the treatment with the CAR T cells, we're actually able to inhibit the growth of these prostate cancers in mice. So it's early days. I mean, certainly what we want to see is that these tumors disappear, but this provides us an opportunity to build on these early results, to enhance the technology, and figure out ways that we can really make a huge impact in this area. And then obviously the goal is to offer this to patients with the idea of potentially curing prostate cancer. And so in summary, I think that certainly immunotherapies are revolutionizing cancer therapy. There are subsets of prostate cancers that are sensitive to immunotherapy. And then I'm certainly very excited about engineering some of these immune cells to really go after and attack cancer. And we are actively investigating many of these different strategies, specifically in the area of prostate cancer. So thank you.
So it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Heather Cheng, who's a medical oncologist at the University of Washington, and Fred Hutch,